to the room. Okay, let's go. Here we go. All right. All right, so we're all ready to get started. We have some people coming in. Give me a minute here.
Okay, we're here. So many people don't want to be seen, my God.
Okay, here we go.
Me too. I'm not Charles Devorah.
You're not Charles?
I say hello.
Oh, there you are. Oh,
I'm
it looks like
outside.
you're sitting in a nice garden there.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
In my very fancy chair outside.
Beautiful, nice. I like it.
Yeah.
You're cool. Very cool.
It's cool outside. Yeah.
It's a beautiful day today in Montreal. Okay, so we're
Mhm.
ready to get started. There's a couple people coming in. Just let me get them in the room and let's get started. Okay. So okay. All right, here we go. Good morning, everybody. So today we begin a brand new book. And whenever we begin a brand new book, it's always exciting. There's something very fun about beginning something from new. And the book that we're going to begin now, having finished the book of Vayikra, is the fourth book of the Torah, namely the book of Bamidbar. The word Bamidbar literally means in the desert. In English, or in the English translations of the Torah, the book of Bamidbar is called Numbers. And the reason why the book of Bamidbar is called Numbers is because the book of Bamidbar opens up with a census that takes place in the desert. But what's interesting is that right after the census takes place, what follows is a great detailed explanation on the formation of the camps of the Jewish people in the desert. Namely, that the Jewish people, the Israelites, had a specific formation. And the formation was as follows. There was 12 tribes. Every 3 tribes were under a banner, a northern banner, a western banner, an eastern banner, and a southern banner. And each tribe had its own flag and its own color. And they marched in this formation that there was this, imagine a rectangle with 3 tribes on each end of the rectangle. And in the center of the rectangle were the 3 families of the Levites. And in the center of the Levites were the Kohanim, those who served in the Mishkan. And in the center, of course, was the Mishkan itself, the tabernacle. And that is how they camped throughout the 40 years in the desert. So what we have in the book of Bamidbar is a description on the encampments, who was in whose group, how they formed, and we also have a census. Because of this, there is not so much commentary on the on the first Torah portion of Bamidbar, which we know the first Torah portion of a book takes the name of the book itself. So, for example, Bamidbar, the first Torah portion of Bamidbar is Bamidbar, and therefore the book is called Bamidbar, and the first Torah portion in the book of Bamidbar is also called Bamidbar. So today what I would like to do is 2 things. Give you an overview of what happens in Bamidbar, and then do a little bit of digging into the name of the book. Because when we open up a new book, when we start a new book, we invariably are going to see that there's a certain pattern or there's a certain motif that happens in every book. I mean, there's a reason why the 5 books of Moses were sectioned off into books, because we know in a Torah scroll, it's one scroll. And where we have the tradition that each one becomes a book is the amount of separation that is traditionally given in the text between book to book. So there's more space. There's a new paragraph that starts and so on and so forth. So the book of Bamidbar, being that it's its own book, what we learn from the fact that it's its own book is that it has its own motif. It has its own perspective. And if we look at the name of the name of the book is In the Desert. And so it begs the question, Why is it that the name of this book is called In the Desert? Because the Jewish people, of course, we know, they don't go into the desert now. When do they go into the desert? They go into the desert with the Exodus. As soon as they leave Egypt, within a few days, they're going to the desert. And of course, we know that because of the series of misadventures, the Jewish people end up wandering in the desert for 40 years. So they spend a lot of time in the desert. The Torah is given in the desert. And so their formation as a people happens in the desert. A lot of things happen in the desert. The question is, why is this book called In the Desert? And why is this Torah portion called In the Desert when their story in the desert does not begin now? In fact, we've just concluded an entire book, the book of Vayikra, which is all about the fact that the Jewish people are receiving all these laws in the desert. In fact, one of the Torah portions that we concluded just a few weeks ago was a Torah portion of Bahar. And the reason why the Torah portion is called Bahar is because the Torah portion relates to the different laws that were given at Har Sinai. Har Sinai, of course, is in the desert. So we have the idea that the Jewish people are in the desert way before this book of Bamidbar, when we talk about the desert. So the short answer is simply that while the book of Shemot is consumed with the Exodus and the instructions for the tabernacle, and the book of Vayikra is involved in the description of the service in the tabernacle, and also many laws, as we have learned over the past few months. The book of Bamidbar is not so law-driven, but rather has a lot of narratives within these pages that will tell us a lot about the trajectory of the Jewish people in the desert and the different stories that happened. And as it could be said about the book of Bamidbar, that it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Because it was the best of times because we're talking about a time that the Jewish people were a cohesive unit, and we see tremendous revelation and great miracles. And yet we also see in the book of Bamidbar multiple stories of betrayal, multiple stories of rebellion, multiple stories of dissent, which characterizes a lot of Bamidbar. So Bamidbar is really a hodgepodge of law and lore that consume the 40 years that the Jewish people were in the desert. So it's going to take us to a lot of the stories of the desert. However, if we look at other scholars who named, specifically Christian scholars, who named the book of Bamidbar Numbers, they looked at it and they said, this book begins with a census, and so we will call this book Numbers because it's all about the census. And yet, if we look deeper, we will find interpretations that the census that we do see at the very beginning of Bamidbar and the name of the Torah portion are actually connected. Now, what makes it very interesting for us is that whenever we look at the Torah portion, and we've mentioned this multiple times, that whenever we look at the Torah portion, we have a teaching that comes to us from the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, as I mentioned many times, that he says about the Torah portion, that's midaf leben mitzitzait, which means you have to live with the times. And of course, when he talks about living with the times, it doesn't mean the New York Times. It means the Torah portion of the week, which means that a Jew cannot live and divorce himself from the lessons of the Torah portion of the week, meaning that there's going to be a lesson to be found for us in the Torah portion of the week at any given time. Last week, we concluded the book of Vayikra. And while our class here focused on the element of the big blessings of security and prosperity that are promised in the book of, at the end of the book of Vayikra, we did not discuss another element, just time constraints that didn't allow for it, but there was another element that emerges in the last section of Vayikra, namely in the Torah portion of Bechukotai, which is that God, in the Torah portion of Bechukotai, warned the Jewish people that above all, they are not to see the relationship with God as happenstance. That specifically in the Torah portion of Bechukotai, it mentions multiple times the idea is that you should not go in a path with God that the Torah portions calls peri. And it's interesting, the Torah book of Vayikra begins with the idea of Vayikra and God called, right? So the idea of calling is intentional. And it ends in the book of Bechukotai with the warning of Lo telechu imik bikeri, don't go with me in happenstance. You have to see everything as intentional. You have to see everything as part of a plan. And so that's how we concluded last week's Torah portion. And now we're opening a new Torah portion. And not only a new Torah portion, we're opening a brand new book. And the name of the book is Bamidbar, in the desert. And so what I would like to do today is, as an overview of the actual Torah portion is concluded, I would like to also dive a little deeper into the name of the Torah portion and the timeliness of the name of the Torah portion, the timeliness of our reading of the Torah portion, and the lessons and also the inspiration that we can find from this week's Torah portion, because our people are in dire need of inspiration. We are in a situation right now that there is a level of hostility that is facing the Jewish people, the likes of which we have not seen in many, many years. And collectively as a people, we are tired. We are tired. It says that when Amalek attacked the Jewish people, it says, V'ata ayef v'yogea, and you were tired and exhausted. That there is this notion that we're tired because the monumental nature of the attacks that happened on October 7th were followed not by healing, not by the world coming and understanding the predicament of the Jewish people, rather by a brand new emergence of a delegitimization of the Jewish people themselves and our connection to the land of Israel, and a constant low level or high level push against us. So we are in dire need of inspiration. And so with that, we're going to go into the Torah portion of Bamidbar. And as I mentioned, Bamidbar is really the best of times and the worst of times. We have the greatest miracles that happen to the Jewish people and the kindness of God that happens to the Jewish people in Bamidbar. We also have rebellion, and we have all types of dysfunction amongst the Jewish people in the book of Bamidbar. But the book of Bamidbar doesn't begin this way. The book of Bamidbar begins with the injunction to have a census. And let me share with you just a brief Torah synopsis of the book of Bamidbar. And then we're going to go into the text of Bamidbar itself. And then I would like to dive down deeper into the name of the Torah portion itself, because the name of the Torah portion is actually going to give us an insight to a great teaching that's found in this week's Torah portion. So before we go into the text, let's just do a nutshell. What is this Torah portion about? So the Torah portion begins with the words in the desert, as I mentioned, Bamidbar, and it starts with a mandate that God gives to Moses to conduct a census of the 12 tribes of the Jewish people. And Moses conducts the census. What's very interesting is that the census, the same words are repeated for every tribe, seemingly superficially extra. Ultimately, what we have is a census of all the 12 tribes, which comes up to be over 600,000 men who are of draftable age. So that would mean from the ages of 20 to 60. And the tribe of Levi is counted separately. They are over 20,000 people. And the tribe of Levi is counted from 1 month and up. And what's interesting is that because of the census that there are about 600,000 men of draftable age, and the Torah actually will tell us each tribe how many men between the ages of 20 and 60 were in each tribe. So what we have at the end of this is a ballpark number of 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. And our sages have extrapolated from that number and said, a man between the age of 20 and 60, let's say each man between the age of 20 and 60 has one wife and 2 children or more, that they extrapolate from this that the amount of Jews that were in the desert at the time were between 2 million to 3 million people. And we often think of the Jewish people in the desert as like a ragtag group that's just small little tribe walking through the desert. But when you know that you have 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, and the rabbis, as I said, extrapolate that to be about 2 million and maybe even more people, we see that what the experience of the Jewish people in the desert was formative, and it was very large. It was much larger than we can imagine in our limited imagination. And so the Torah tells us that the Levites or the Levium are counted separately. They will serve in the sanctuary. And then we're told that there are 3 families within the Levites. We have the Gershon family, the Kahat family, and the Merari family. And we're told about the responsibility of the Kahat family, which was to carry all the vessels. And again, we have the encampments, the description of the encampments. And to give you just an example of the encampments, of the numbers in each encampment, so let's say the tribe of Judah had 74,000 people. Judah, Issachar, and Zevulun all camped together on the south. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad camped together on the west. Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin camped together in the north. And Dan, Asher, and Naphtali camped together in the south. Sorry, it's in the north. So what we have here, each tribe has its own emblem. Each tribe has its own color. So this is the beginning of the Torah portion of the book of Bamidbar, and it is a description of the Torah portion. Now, let's get into the text of the Torah portion. And then when we get into the text of the Torah portion, we will dive a little deeper into the name of the Torah portion and why does a Torah portion that discusses a census get connected to the word in the desert. And not only does the Torah portion get connected to the desert, but the entire book of Bamidbar rather gets connected to the desert. So here we have the opening verses of this Torah portion. And as you see, that today, thank you, Chabad.org, today is the 2nd of Sivan. So the 2nd of Sivan is a few days before the giving of the Torah, because, sorry, the Shabbat will be, not today, the Shabbat will be the 2nd of Sivan, which is a few days before the giving of the Torah. And so what we have here is that the Torah portion of Bamidbar will be read the Shabbat before Shavuot. Shavuot, of course, is next week after the Shabbat. So, of course, we're learning the Torah portion 5-6 days before Shabbat. So following the coming Shabbat, we have Shavuot, which begins on Tuesday night. So we have an interesting teaching, which is that the Torah portion of Bamidbar is always read before Shavuot. It's fascinating, always. And so we see that there's a connection between the Torah portion of Bamidbar and the holiday of Shavuot. So let's get into the Torah reading, which is the opening words of Bamidbar. And it begins as follows. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Bamidbar Sinai. God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert. Ba'ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting. Be'echad lachodesh hasheni, on the first day of the second month. B'shana hashenis, in the second year. Litzesa me'eretz Mitzrayim, on the counting of from them leaving Egypt. So here we are, we have a date. We are 1 year after the Jewish people leave Egypt. So it's the second year after having left Egypt. It is the first day rather of the second month, which is the month of ER. And we, of course, are also now in the month of ER. So it's interesting that we're reading the Torah portion at a time that the Torah portion discusses the month that we're in. And it starts off with an injunction, which is Su'u es rosh kol adas b'nei Yisrael, count the heads of all the entire community of Israel, each one according to its group. Okay, that is the injunction, and then you will see that when are they counted? Miben esrim shana umayla, from the age of 20 and up. Kol yotzei tzava, anyone who is fit to serve in the army. Tifkedu otam, you should count them. Litzva otam, according to their groups. Ata va'aron, you and Aaron shall count them. And then it goes on to explain how they will count them. Who is going to help them with the count? All the leaders of the tribes. Then the Torah lists all the leaders of the tribes, which we have right up here. These are all the leaders of the tribes. And then after that, it talks about how they were counted. And the word that the Torah uses for counting them is vayifkedeim. He counted them. The other word that is used here for counting is su'u, which means to rise up. And we know, how do you say counting? There's another word to say counting. How do we say counting in Hebrew? There are multiple ways.
L'saper.
The sapar, the spoch, right? Like Sfirat Omer, right? We're counting the Omer. So what we have here is that the Torah uses a different word for counting. The first word the Torah uses for counting is su'u, to raise. And then after that, the Torah uses the word tifkedu. Tifkedu means to count, but what does tifkedu also mean? Lifkod. Does anyone who's familiar in Hebrew?
Redeem.
What is
Command.
Redeem.
redeem? What else? Lifkod also means to appoint. In biblical Hebrew, it's to appoint. Lifkod also means to remember. For example, we say that God remembered Sarah and he gave her a child. Vayifkod Elokim et Sarah. That God remembered Sarah. So the etymology, Pei Kuf Dalid, is to count, to remember, to appoint, to and so on and so forth. To anoint, count, remember. So what does that tell you about the word pakad? Also, when Moses goes out of sees the Jewish people, I'm just going to just mute some because I'm getting a little feedback here. When Moses comes to redeem the Jewish people, God tells him, what are you going to tell the Jewish people? Pakod, pakadati, I have remembered you. Lifkod also means to remember. So the word pakod, the etymology of this root word, of this shoresh, pakod, means multiple things. It means to remember, it means to anoint, it means to appoint, it means to count. If I tell you, remember, anoint, appoint, and count, what does that conjure up for you? And you can unmute yourself to say it. Just put yourself back on mute after you finish, because otherwise we get feedback. What is the word pakod conjure up for you?
Pakod also means pikadon in Hebrew. It's the money that was given for safekeeping.
Yes, there's also a safekeeping giving of money. But what are all these words? When I say I count you, I anoint you, I remember you,
I value you.
I value you, I distinguish you, I am intentional with you. It speaks of intentionality. It speaks of a specific intentionality that the word count does not convey. The word count means to count. When you have a word pakod, which also means in Hebrew multiple things, which is to remember in a good way, like God says, I remembered Sarah, or to remember the Jewish people, pakod pakadati etchem. I remembered you in your slavery and I will take you out. Or pakod, to anoint or to appoint. So when you have the word pakod, it's much stronger than counting. It's a remembering, it's a giving grace, it's very intentional in its connection. And the same is true for the first word that's used in this Torah portion, which is su'u et rosh kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. You should lift the head of every person. Now it's, of course, translated in English is take the sum, because that's the meaning of it. But su'u means to rise or to raise. It's rosh kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. So the two words that we have here, which is the word lifkod, to count, and also the word to raise, tells us that this is not just a counting, but there's something more that's happening in the counting, which is a raising. And Rashi, of course, is going to ask the question, why now? Why a count? Is there a specific reason why the Jewish people are being counted now? And Rashi gives us a teaching. Again, from the counting, Rashi emerges with a teaching. And what's the teaching that Rashi emerges with? Rashi says, Vayidaber, that God is giving this commandment to count. And he is asking, why here? Why now? Why at this time? It seems to be out of place. It seems to be quite random. Why is God counting the Jewish people at this specific juncture in their story, in their history? And Rashi gives us the answer. Rashi says, Mitay chibastan lefanav, because of his intense love, because of his love that exists before him. Mayne aisam kol sha'ah, he counts them at every opportunity. Kol sha'ah literally means every hour, but God does not count us every hour, though maybe Rashi is hinting to something much deeper here. But kol sha'ah is also a euphemism for all the time. And then he elaborates here, Kishiyatsu mimitzrayim an, that when they left Egypt, he counted them. Kishenaflu ba'egel man, and when they fell after the sin of the golden calf, he counted them. At that point, he counted them leida minyan hanaisrim, to understand how many were left over. Kisheba lahasha shchinasai aleihem an, when it came time for the Shechina to rest on the camp of the Jewish people, he counted them. Be'echad b'nisan hukam hamishkan. The Mishkan was assembled on the first day of Mishkan, of Nisan rather. Be'echad ba'iyar man'am. So now God is going to rest upon the Jewish people, and so he counts them. So we have here a multiple counting. Many times they are counted. Now, the Medrash says about this counting, the Medrash says that the Jewish people were actually counted multiple times, more than this. The Jewish people are counted at least enumerated. the enumerated counting was done multiple times. So here we have, Rashi tells us the different times that they were counted. And here we have from the Medrash tells us that if you look throughout the Torah, you will see that the Jewish people are counted a total of 9 times, and there will be a great counting the 10th time. So the Medrash tells us the Jewish people were counted when the Jewish people went down to Egypt, when they came out of Egypt after the golden calf, like Rashi mentions twice in the book of Bamidbar, once in the formation of the camps that we are discussing now, and once when they divide the land, they're counted again. In the days of Shaul, they are counted twice. Then later on in the days of David, they are counted. The 9th time that they are counted was during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. And then the Medrash tells us that they will be counted once again when the Mashiach will come. This is a Medrash. But what we have here is that there's an association that Rashi is telling us, an important teaching, which is mitoch hibasam. Because of his love for the Jewish people, that's why he counts them. So we see that the census that takes place, specifically now, at the beginning of the book of Bamidbar is a specific type of census. It's not a practical census necessarily, but rather it's a census out of love. It's like when you have something that you have a collection that you like and you review your collection. So God is kind of reviewing the Jewish people out of love. And it's beautiful to have to bask in that experience, that God is counting us out of love. It's something that we can cherish, that God is counting us out of love. And so there's actually a huge connection between this idea that God is counting us out of love and the whole notion of the Jewish people being in the desert, and the connection between this counting, the census, and the love for God for us in the desert. As I mentioned, the Torah tells us that the rabbis tell us rather that the Torah portion of Bamidbar is always read before Shavuot, always. And so therefore the rabbis take from it that there is an inherent connection between the book of Bamidbar and certainly the Torah portion of Bamidbar and the holiday of Shavuot. And there's so much writings and teachings about the inherent connection between Shavuot and Bamidbar. And there are multiple teachings. Some of them are this: what's the connection between the book of Bamidbar and Shavuot? Again, why are we insisting that there's a connection? Because of its proximity, and also by the fact that in our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, the book of Bamidbar is not called the book of Numbers. It is called Bamidbar, which means that there is a connection to the Jewish people that is very specific to their experience in the desert, that there's something that happens to the Jewish people in the desert that is specific to their experience as a Jewish people. And Rashi, in his first Rashi on this book, says, you know what the connection is between the name of the Torah portion, Bamidbar, that they're in the desert, is that the census that they have at the very beginning of this book is a census that is driven by God's love. And this Rashi kind of sheds some light on a deeper meaning of the fact that the name of this book is called In the Desert, and it's not called Numbers, even though our good friends, Christian scholars and the like, decided to call this book the Book of Numbers. And so you'll find that in the English translation or the English rendering, it will be called Numbers, but it's not Numbers, it's In the Desert. I always puzzled at the fact that our teachers and our writers, when we translate our own books, you don't translate the book the way it's called. So, you know, if you take a Chumash off a shelf and it has the English translation, it will say Bamidbar Numbers. But Bamidbar does not mean numbers. Bamidbar means in the desert. So what's the connection between the desert, Shavuot, and the Torah? So there's a few. I'll give you a few just superficially, but then I want to go down a little deeper into this connection. So superficially, it's this: the Jewish people read the book of Bamidbar right before Shavuot. Bamidbar means in the desert, because God gave us the Torah in the desert, because there is something about the desert which allows the Torah to be given in a way that makes it a heritage for all times, which is number one. The fact that the Torah was not given in a specific country means that the Torah's relevance is not for a specific country. In other words, you know, as the song goes about New York, New York, you know, they say, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So the same is true with the desert. If you could receive a Torah in the desert and you could keep the Torah in the desert, you could keep it everywhere, because the desert is literally a landscape. It's an empty landscape. And there's no civilization there. There's no custom there. There's no presuppositions there. Therefore, it's a blank slate for which the Jewish people could receive a Torah. And the desert is the perfect place because there's There's no prerequisite. There's no culture that you have to take into consideration, or later on say, oh, well, the Torah was given in such country. That means the Torah is only relevant for such country. God, probably knowing the history of the Jewish people, that a big portion of our history would be outside of the land of Israel, gave us the Torah in a place that was a no man's land, so that if you could keep it in the desert, you could keep it anywhere, and also to give us the humility and other reasons. But there's a deeper reason about calling this week's Torah portion in the desert. And what I found interesting is that although this is not spoken about so much, you do see that a very interesting pairing between this week's Torah portion and the Haftorah. Now we know whenever we look at the Torah portion, there's always a connection between the Torah portion and the Haftorah. There always has to be, because the Haftorah, which is not, by the way, just for the record, Haftorah is not written, just a minute, my plugged in. Hold on, yeah, perfect. Haftorah is the accompaniment to the reading of the Torah that sometimes substituted the reading of the Torah when the Jewish people did not have permission to read the Torah. So the rabbis always tried to connect the Haftorah to the Torah portion. So we go to the Haftorah, and the Haftorah discusses a very interesting thing about our connection to God. It discusses the whole issue of fidelity. And it uses the expression of being, having infidelity in a marriage, and the Jewish people having infidelity in the marriage with God, and the outcome of that infidelity. And then the Haftorah concludes with the following words. And I want to share the Haftorah of this week's Torah portion with you, because I found that the juxtaposition was something that we could not ignore. So let me get into this week's Haftorah. So here we have the Haftorah for Bamidbar. And let me just share it. Okay, here we go. This is the Haftorah for Bamidbar. As you see, this is Parshas Bamidbar, and we are in the section of Haftorah. And as I mentioned, the Haftorah begins like the Torah portion begins, which is V'haya Mispar B'nei Yisrael K'chol Hayam Asher Lo Yimad V'lo Yisafer, that the Jewish people are going to be as numerous as the sand in the sea, which will not be able to be counted. Obviously, this is not for now, but it's a promise for the future. But I would like to take you to the end of the Haftorah, okay? Because the end of the Haftorah concludes with one of the most beautiful verses that we have in our Tanakh. One of the most, I would say, romantic verses that we have in the Tanakh. And which is this? The Haftorah ends with the last two verses as follows. After talking about the Jewish people's infidelity and their straying from God, it talks about their coming back to God. And this is how it concludes. Varastich li la'olam. I will betroth you to me forever. Varastich li, and I will betroth you to me b'tzedek, with righteousness, ubemishpat, and with justice, ubechesed, and with kindness, uberachamim, and with compassion. And then it ends off, Varastich li, and I will betroth you be'emunah, with faith, v'yadata es Hashem, and you will know God. So the Torah portion ends off, the Haftorah ends off with this very poetic, beautiful two verses, which talks about the fact that God says, after our wanderings and our strayings, that despite all the gulf that was created between us and God through the ups and downs of our history, the ending of our story is that God says about us that I will betroth you forever. I will betroth you with righteousness and with justice and with kindness and with compassion and with faith, and you will know God. And these two verses, by the way, are literally verses that people use in marriage proposals, and it's just so poetic. And this is how the Haftorah ends. The Haftorah ends with this imagery of a betrothal between the Jewish people and God. And the question is, what's the connection between this and the Torah portion of Bamidbar? And the answer is that in the giving of the Torah, that was our initial marriage contract, as it were, with God. Throughout the ages, we've been in various states of adhering to that contract and breaking it. We have been all over the world and kind of disconnected from God. But the promise is that God says to us, I will betroth you in such a fashion. I just want to show the Rashi's commentary. Sorry for scrolling up like that. I hope it doesn't give you a headache. So I'm going to go to the Rashi's commentary. Rashi talks about this idea that God is going to give us, God is going to betroth with righteousness. And you see that Rashi is going through great detail, and he brings proof of all the ideas that God will take us back as his people with mercy and justice and kindness. And here he ends off the last one. He quotes Isaiah, Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'gaimer, which is that the Zion shall be redeemed through justice. Okay, and he says v'gaimer, which means etc. But the verses Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'shaveha b'tzedakah. Okay, it's not written here. It's only alluded here that Zion will be redeemed through justice, and her returners through tzedakah. Now here, the translation of shaveha is penitence, but shaveha also means her hostages. So here we have in our Torah portion a prescription for redemption, which is that we are betrothed to God. God betrothed us with righteousness, with justice, with kindness, and with compassion. And this is what Rashi says here, that I will return the Jewish people when they engage in this. And this verse, Sion b'mishpat tipadeh, here it says v'gomer, etc. But the original verse is v'shaveha b'tzedakah, and its hostages will be returned through charity, teaches us that there is a promise of a better tomorrow. I find it's quite curious that the verse here that Rashi chooses to teach us is specifically this verse that talks about her hostages being returned. And essentially what the Torah is telling us is that when we follow the Torah, when we do the mitzvot, when we do tzedakah, when we have emunah, when we have faith, then God, as it were, betrothed us. Okay? And this betrothal is protective, and it gives us strength, and it gives us blessing. So almost a prescription, as it were, for our situation that we find ourselves here today with hostages, with chaos, is in this week's Torah portion, which is the Torah portion opens up and tells us that God is counting us. Rashi tells us mitoch chibatam, because he loves them. God loves us. And then it ends off in the Haftorah that God is going to betroth us again, and he's going to use all the elements to betroth us. He's going to betroth us with kindness. He's going to betroth us with compassion, with justice, and with righteousness. And here, this verse of what is righteousness? It's tzedakah. It's doing acts of goodness and kindness to each other, and it's being connected to the Torah. And this, says Isaiah, is how the hostages of Israel will be returned. Now, could you imagine that there's a prophecy that talks about hostages returning to Israel, v'shaveha b'tzedakah, that her her fraternities will come back with righteousness. So the answer for us here is that that's our power. Our power is being betrothed to God. So I would like to go deeper into this notion of our power being betrothed to God, because what we have here, again, the question of the fact that the Torah portion that is read right before the Shabbat or is read on the Shabbat rather, before Shavuot, is called Bamidbar, in the desert, and that the rabbis did not call this counting, but they used the word lifgod. The Torah says the word lifgod to point, enumerate, remember, and the Torah uses the word linsoa to raise. So we see that the act of counting is connected to the act of love, and therefore the name of the Torah portion is not called counting, but the name of the Torah portion is called desert. So why is desert connected to love? What's the connection between Bamidbar, Midbar, and love? So we do see a little bit of a hint of this in this week's Haftorah, where God says, I will betroth you again. But I would like to bring to your attention a very famous and probably well-known, and many of you may be familiar with this prophecy that comes to us from Jeremiah. And this prophecy is actually quoted, of all days of the year, it's quoted on Yom Kippur. And I want to share with you this prophecy because it's very much connected to the idea of Midbar, and it's very much connected to the idea of the Jewish people receiving the Torah. So let me share with you this verse from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah. And here we go. And let me just share this with you. Here we go. Here's Jeremiah. Let me just move this so you can see. This is chapter 2 of Jeremiah, and it's a prophecy. It says, "Vayihi dvar Hashem elai lemor." God, the word of God came to me, and He said this following. Sorry for that. Hailech ukarasa ba'azne Yerushalayim. Go and speak to the ears of Jerusalem, to the people of Jerusalem. Lemar kayamar Hashem, maybe even to the city of Jerusalem, maybe to the energy of Jerusalem. Kayamar Hashem, so says God. This is the prophecy. What's the prophecy? The prophecy as follows. Zacharti lach, I remember years. Chesed nu'arayich, I remember for you the kindness of your youth. What was this? The kindness of your youth? Ahavas kluloisayach, the love of your marriage ceremony. Again, this week's Haftorah is about the nuptials. It's about the engagement of God and the Jewish people, the re-engagement of God and the Jewish people. I remember the love of your nuptials. What is the love of your nuptials? What is the love of your youth? What is the love of the youth of the Jewish people? What is it that God remembers on our behalf? What is it that He gives us credit for? What is something that stands us in good stead? Lechech achrei bamidbar. You know what God says? You know what I'll never forget? That you went after me in the desert. Be'eretz lo zerua. In a land that is not sown, in the wilderness. You followed me in the desert. And Rashi's commentary, and very interesting on this, is that Im hayisim shavim elai. If you will return to me, tavati lerachim aleichem, my desire actually is to have compassion on you. Ki zacharti chesed nirayach, I always remember the kindness of your youth, says God to the Jewish people. Va'ahavas kluleisayach, and the love of your nuptials, that I brought you to the wedding canopy. The wedding canopy, of course, is Shavuot, the giving of the Torah. And what was it that you went into a land that was not sown? Okay, and Rashi says, Mahu chesed ne'orayach, what is this great kindness that you did for me? Lechtech achrei shluchai Moshe va'Aaron, that you went after Moses and Aaron. You followed them into the desert. Me'eretz ne'sheves, you left a civilization. You left an inhabited land, which was what? Egypt. Yatzati lamidbar, you went into the desert. Ve'ein seidel aderach, you didn't even have food for the way. He amanasem bam, be because you believed in me. But besides this thing that God says that you believed in me, you went you went to the desert and you believed in me. I will forever remember this. I want to share with you a very famous medrash that is repeated whenever we study about Shavuot. It's a famous medrash. Little children know the medrash. And there are songs made about this medrash. It's a very famous medrash. What's the medrash? The medrash is as follows. There's a medrash that says that before God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, so here we are a few days before Shavuot, a week before Shavuot. Before God gave the Jewish people the Torah, he said, let me offer the Torah to the nations of the world. And this medrash appears saying the following: that God appeared to different nations of the world, and he offered to them also to have a Torah. And for each one, for a different reason, declined to have the Torah. Because, as the Medrash says, he asked the Yishmaelim, he asked the Arab people, and they said they don't want, it says, what does it say in the Torah? Don't steal. And they want to steal the land of Israel. He asked the children of Esav, they said, it says, they asked, what does it say in the Torah? And God said, it says in the Torah, you should not kill. And they said, well, we want to have the right to kill, and so on and so forth. So there's this very famous medrash that talks about the fact that God came to different countries, to different nations, to different nationalities, before he gave us the Torah. Because the question is, why were the Jewish people given the Torah? So yes, the Jewish people were given the Torah by virtue of Abraham's recognition of Hashem. But to make the playing field equal, to make it fair, the Medrash says God actually offered the Torah to different nations of the world, and they didn't want to take it. You know why they didn't want to take it? They didn't want to take it because who wants to take 613 injunctions? Do this, don't do this, don't worship this, remember the poor, don't kill, don't murder, don't bear false witness, don't persecute someone, don't take advantage of someone, don't do this, 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 remember me, remember my holidays. In every other faith system, there is benefits to those who keep the faith. In Christianity, you're gonna have eternal bliss. You know, in Islam, you're gonna have the 72 virgins. In Judaism, even though we're promised Olam Haba, our sages tell us very clearly, Al tihiyu kavadim hamshamshin es harav al manas lekabel pras. You should not be like servants who work for their master for a prize. Allah havei kanashim kavadim hamshamshin es harav. Be people who don't want to work for the prize, but for the purpose, which is there's a purpose. It's to refine you. You need to become a better person. So think about this. The Medrash tells us that God did offer all these interesting restrictions upon the nations of the world. And the nations of the world said, thanks, but no thanks. Why? Who needs the Torah? Who needs his conscience? Who needs to be held to a higher standard? Who needs to have 613 mitzvot that you're always, even when you're an observant Jew and you try your best to keep, you're not keeping it perfectly well. And you're always going to have to improve yourself, whether it's the laws of Shabbat, the laws of Kashrut, or even if you've mastered that, the laws of Lashon Hara, the laws of not being jealous, the laws of giving the benefit of the doubt. There's so many rules and restrictions upon the Jewish people. You know, some people who leave Judaism, you see some people who leave Judaism from certain religious segments, they don't want the laws. They say also, I don't want the laws. I don't want this restrictions. Not have to remember the Shabbat. I don't want to have to remember Kashrut. This, right? So the nations of the world also said, you know, thanks, but no thanks. The way they worship is in a way that they will receive peace for belief. Believe in a God, and everything is good. Now you're going to have to wake up in the morning, and you're going to have to take upon yourself to love your fellow Jew. You're going to have to take upon yourself to forgive every night. You're going to have to take upon yourself to do mitzvah, to give tzedakah, to keep the Shabbat, to keep the rules, not to speak Lashon Hara. All these things. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to be burdened by it. And the Jewish people said, okay, what did we say about the Torah? We said, Naseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will understand why. We're taking this on face value. God, you want us to do this? We will do this. It's true that in the history of the Jewish people, we've had ups and downs, and we have strayed and come back, and we have come back partially and strayed, continue to stray, and we are human beings. And our nature is to want to do what's comfortable, and we don't want to necessarily do what the Torah tells us to do. Who wants to do what the Torah tells us to do? We don't want to do what the Torah tells us to do. But we do it. We've taken the Torah. We are the Jewish people, carry God's torch. And for this going after God in the desert and taking upon all these restrictions before we even came to the land is something that God will never forget. So even though we may have sinned and we may have gone very far from our tradition, and we may have been wrong with each other, not treated each other with respect, not follow the rules bein Adam lamakom, between us and God, not follow the rules bein Adam lechavero, between us and our fellow person, yet we on the basis of this crazy thing that we did, which is that we became God's people. This week's Haftorah says, guess what? After everything is said and done, Varastithli le'olam, I will betroth you forever, says God. I will remember this forever. And so when we open up this week's Torah portion, and a Torah portion that's about a census, and Rashi tells us right away, the census is not about counting, the census is about love. And the name of the Torah portion is somehow Midbar, desert. And then you look into the writings of prophets. And what do they say? What's desert? Desert is all about love. It's about our love for God. It's our love for God that gets mentioned in this week's Haftorah, this betrothal. It's our love for God that we invoke on Yom Kippur from Jeremiah, that we remember this. A few days before Shavuot, 5784, when we're going to receive the Torah for the 3,300 and I don't know which time, we remember, yes, we as a people, we followed God into the desert. We followed God into the desert. We stood by the mountain and we accepted the Torah, Naaseh v'Nishma. And for this, we will forever be blessed. For this, we will forever have a promise of redemption. And so this week, as we're about to read the Torah, and this week, as we're about to get into the holiday of Shavuot, when we read Bamidbar, this year of all years, we read Bamidbar, and we are not just reading it for ourselves. We read Bamidbar, we're also reading it for God. And we're saying to God, Bamidbar, we went into the desert. We took upon ourselves all the commandments. We did the minutia. We work on refining ourselves. Until 120, a Jew is not done. We can never, ever say about ourselves, God forbid, we should ever say about ourselves that we are religious. That's the most dangerous thing for a Jew to say about themselves. Frankly, it's a dangerous thing for anyone to say about themselves, to say, I'm religious. It's a horrible word, and it's dangerous. Why? Because a Jew has to be always in the process of receiving the Torah. And we are in the process of receiving the Torah. But this year, as the Jewish people are facing one of the greatest challenges that they had in recent history, certainly in this recent history, challenges from within and challenges from without, the difficulties that we are facing every single day, it's so noisy, it's so loud. When we read the Torah this Shabbat, and we read the words Bamidbar Sinai in the desert, it's not just us remembering God, it's also us calling on God to remember us. Remember, God, we went followed you in the desert. And yes, we did accept the Torah. And for better and for worse, we may not have been the best people, but we are your people. And we are forever going to be your people, as you promised in this week's Haftorah, that God is going to betroth us again. And to us, we have to say that the power of our people has always been and will always be found in the Torah. And if we want God's embrace, we have to be more invested, louder, and prouder about our tradition, because that's our ticket, because that's the cost that we bore. That's what we bore all these years, that we did something that our sages tell us that no other nation wanted to do. No other nation wanted the Torah, each one for a different reason. Don't tell me not to kill people. How am I going to conquer lands? Don't tell me not to steal. How am I going to take with that what I want? Don't tell me not to covet. I want what I want. Don't tell me to keep Shabbat. That's bad for business. Don't tell me to honor my parents. That's cumbersome. Don't tell me not to swear falsely. That doesn't allow me to get ahead. Yet God told us all that, plus, plus, plus. And what did we say? What did we say? We remember the Shabbat before Shavuot. We said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it. And then we'll figure out why we are doing it. And maybe it's been 2,000, 3,000 years, or it's 3,500 years since we got the Torah, 3,300 and some. And we're maybe still discussing why. Why? We said Nasa, we said it. We were going to do it. Why? We're still figuring it out. Point is that this week, when we look at the fact that in our tradition, the book of Bamidbar, which, you know what, it talks a lot about the good things that we've done and the not so good things that we've done, the ups and downs of the desert life, like I said, was the best of times and the worst of times. It was a very Jewish experience, rebellion, politics, everything that we have today, we had then. But we still forged forward. We still became his people. We still accepted the Torah. And it wasn't necessarily convenient. And that's what we remember this week when we read the Torah. And that's what we're going to remember when we read the Haftorah this week, right before Shavuot. It's us reminding God also that it's not just God reminding us, but it's us reminding God, remember, God, we accepted the Torah. And the benefit that we have, yes, we do. We know that being connected to God's word is of a benefit. But on a human level, on a level of just being giving into our impulses, it's not fun to have a bunch of mitzvot that we have to do. It's a big burden. And yet, of all the nations, we said, we'll take the burden. We'll take the burden. And everyone else found a way to make a religion and excuse all these burdens away. Christians, as long as you have belief. The Muslims, as long as you do X, Y, and Z, you could kill, you could murder, you could lie, you could cheat. It's all good. And you're going to go to heaven even if you in the name of God, you'll get 72 virgins. Us? No. We're told God wants a world in this world. He wants us to correct this world. He wants us to work on this world. Yes, a soul will have peace from living a life that is well lived. But that's not what we strive for. We strive to make this world a better place. In every place that Jews have come, that's what they've done. Worked on making this world a better place. And that's to the credit to God, but it's the credit mostly also, I guess, no, also to the Jewish people. And this is what we're going to bring to the table this Shavuot. We're going to bring it to God. We're going to say, God, we accept the Torah again, but remember what it says in the prophets in Jeremiah. Zacharti lach chesed ne'orayach. I remember the kindness of your youth. Lech tech acharai Bamidbar. That we followed you in the desert. The name of this week's Torah portion, the name of the book that we're going into, the Torah portion that we read before the receiving of the Torah. And so we will go to the Torah. We will go to the Torah reading this Shavuot, and I encourage everyone to come here. That's Aseret HaDibrot. The Rebbe encouraged this very strongly. Chabad of Westmount, we do it in style. When we make the Torah reading for the Aseret HaDibrot, we make sure to follow it with a beautiful Kiddush, a dairy Kiddush that's just good for the soul and good for the body, and being together in synagogue and affirming again, once again, as a people, Naaseh v'nishma. Yes, God, that's who we are. We will do and we will hear. And yes, we are intertwined with you, and we will stay the course. And please, God, may you reveal the promises that are found in your prophecy, that you will betroth us forever, that you will return our hostages, that you will remember Zion with grace and with kindness, and that you will shower us with the blessings of the people that have stayed with you through thick and thin. So that's how we open the Torah portion of Bamidbar. That's how we're opening the book of Bamidbar. That's how we're going into Shavuot. And I want to wish everyone a Shavuot that is well endowed. And we are going to have a Torah class before Shavuot, because Monday, Shavuot is only Tuesday, but the Torah reading is going to be connected, of course, to the week before, because the Shabbat before. So I wish everyone a blessed week, good preparations for the holiday of Shavuot, and the very name of this Torah portion. And if you could walk away with this teaching, And that's what I'm walking away from myself. The very name of this Torah portion, the very name of this book, Bamidbar, and the fact that that has become the tradition, not numbers, but that even the numbers, Rashi says, is all about love. That the very name of the Torah portion is evoking to God and to us our connection to God, our self-sacrifice to him, and the promise that he has to us for having followed him into Bamidbar, into the desert.
Very
So
good
I wish
smell.
everyone a blessed week, and we should go from strength to strength.
Thank you for your enthusiasm.
Amazing.
Well,
Amazing.
need the enthusiasm. Yesterday we had in our Chabad, we had a beautiful Hebrew school graduation. 200 children and their parents came and celebrated the graduation across the street from the Chabad in Westmount Square. There's a beautiful park on the corner of Wood and de Maisonneuve. It belongs to Dawson. It's called, I think, the Queen Elizabeth Gardens or something like that. And they had a beautiful fair. They had a graduation ceremony. They had a children's fair, bouncing castles, the whole 9 yards, a dinner, a beautiful dinner and there were a few hundred people there. It was beautiful. On the other side of de Maisonneuve was a demonstration calling from the river to the sea. On the other side at the same time. And I could not help the juxtaposition. Here are young children being taught, if you would, indoctrinated to love, to celebrate their identity in a way that is love everyone, give thanks, give tzedakah, remember Shabbat. On the one side of de Maisonneuve and Wood, and on the other side of de Maisonneuve and Wood, what did we see? Hate, vitriol on the streets of Montreal, divided by a small street. And thank God the noise from the machines, when they have these bouncing castles, it makes a lot of noise. It diffused the noise that was from the other side. But the juxtaposition could not have been any stronger. And perhaps seeing these beautiful children celebrating Torah, hundreds, Torah, mitzvah, Shabbat on the one side, and the hate and the anger and the vitriol on the other side. And I was thinking to myself when I was studying the Torah portion of Bamidbar, what's Bamidbar about? Opening verses of Bamidbar is simply a census and a formation. It's a technical parsha. And then I said, no, there's more to this Torah portion than meets the eye. And sure enough, I said, I'm going to look through the Haftorah. I'm going to look at the juxtaposition of Bamidbar and Shavuot. And I said, I need to hear this passage, having seen what I saw yesterday and what we're all experiencing on one level or another, right? And so we go into Shavuot. This Shavuot is a very special Shavuot. And it's a Shavuot that every Jew has to show up in shul. Every single Jew has to show up in shul. Wherever your shul is, come. And if you need a shul, come to Chabad of Westmount. We're going to have such a good party. Show up in shul. Be there when the Torah reading is read for the 10 Commandments. The Rebbe encouraged this more than anything else. A lot of shuls have late night learning, which is a beautiful custom. It comes back. It's an old mystical custom to learn Torah all night because the Jewish people didn't sleep the night before Shavuot, or they slept the night before Shavuot. So we have to make up for it. They shouldn't have slept, but they slept. However, the Rebbe pushed very strongly that Jews just show up in synagogue and hear the 10 Commandments read. Why? For two reasons. Reason number one is that we should hear it for ourselves, that we should know what the 10 Commandments are about. We will show up, so we should know. We have to remember what it means to be a Jew. That's reason number one. Reason number two is because we are reenacting what happened over 3,300 years ago. And that original connection between us and God is something that we can hold very dear to our hearts, and also that we hold as a merit between us and all the other nations. And so, yes, Shavuot is the time where, God took us out of Egypt by Pesach. By Shavuot, we accepted God as our God, and we accepted his commandments. And therefore, Shavuot is a great tribute to the Jewish people. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the Rebbe wanted every man, woman, and child. The Rebbe said even a newborn baby will be brought to shul, a baby who can't even understand what's being said. Be present. Be there as a witness to say, first of all, again, to hear what has to be read, the 10 Commandments, for us to absorb again those beautiful teachings. Perhaps more importantly, to stand in testimony of what we have stood for 3,300 years, that we're still here, we're still listening to the Torah, we're reenacting the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And for this, I have to say that this is something that was galvanizing me as I studied the Torah portion. Because every year we study the Torah portion of Bamidbar, we find something else that we can dive deep. The commentaries on Bamidbar are actually very scant, because the majority of the first Torah portion of Bamidbar is literally a census. So look at any census. Take a census from the government of Canada. Names, addresses, phone numbers, how many people live in this apartment? Is there a commentary on this? Can you go in and start waxing poetic about it? Numbers, it's names, it's amounts. So mostly Bamidbar, there's no commentary. Rashi has almost no commentary on Bamidbar. There's a few here and there. And every year we find a commentary that speaks to us. This year, the commentary that spoke to me was this idea that, where are we? We're before Shavuot. What's the connection between Shavuot and Midbar and the name itself? The name itself. And we find in the richness of our tradition that our prophets wax poetically about this about this notion of desert. And so as this week we are reading in the desert, let's hold on to that as a flag of pride between us and God, that we did go into the desert and we have connected to God. For better or for worse, we are here. Let's be here again this Shavuot. And I want to wish everyone a blessed week. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Toda rabah.
Thank you.
My pleasure.